Good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth Bureau of Business Research webinar of the 2019 Spring Series. Today we'll be looking at the results of the study, The Economic Impact of Nebraska Military Assets. This is a study that was completed through a collaboration between the UNL Bureau of Business Research and the Nebraska Commission on Military and Veterans Affairs. Today's presentation is sponsored by the Bureau of Business Research within the Department of Economics at the College of Business at UNL. My name is Mitchel Herian. I'm a Senior Research Associate at the Bureau of Business Research. I'm joined today by Phil O'Donnell, who serves as the Military Affairs Liaison with the Commission on Military and Veterans Affairs. I should point out that Dr. Eric Thompson, who is not here today, also co-authored the report that we'll be presenting today. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to point out just several features of the webinar. As you can see, we'll be presenting a PowerPoint presentation to communicate the results of the study to you today. One feature of the webinar is a chat window where you can chat with other participants of the webinar. We also have a question and answer window where you can type in any questions that you might have for Phil or I today. That window should be at the bottom of your screen. We look forward to any questions that you might have, and you can type in your question at any time. However, we will answer questions at the end of the webinar after the presentation has been completed. I'll now turn the presentation over to Phil, who will provide an overview of the Commission on Military and Veterans Affairs and briefly describe the purpose of the report.
Thanks, Mitch, and thank you for your active interest on military and veterans affairs in the state of Nebraska. Established in 2016, this 10-member commission strives to preserve and protect installations across the state, attract new military missions across the state, and serve Nebraska's military and veterans families. So members of the Commission on Military and Veterans Affairs include the Director of Nebraska's Department of Economic Development, Dave Rippey, the Director of Nebraska's Department of Veterans Affairs, John Hilgert, the Adjutant General of Nebraska's National Guard, Major General Darrell Bohawk, and 3 appointed commissioners from each of Nebraska's 3 congressional districts. The 1st Congressional District Commissioner is Tammy Thompson. The 2nd Congressional District Commissioner is Bill Williams, and the 3rd Congressional District Commissioner is former State Senator Dave Bloomfield. Finally, there are 4 ex officio non-voting members of the Commission on Military and Veterans Affairs. Those members include the Chair of Nebraska's Employer Supportive Guard and Reserve Organization, the Commander of the 55th Wing at Offutt Air Force Base, the Commander of the 557th Weather Wing at Offutt Air Force Base, and the Commander of the United States Strategic Command. The key deliverable of the Commission is its annual report to the Governor and the Nebraska Legislature. In 2017 and 2018, the Commission contracted with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Bureau of Business Research to assess the economic impact of Nebraska's military assets. In addition to the economic impact, the annual report includes a summary of military assets in Nebraska and Commission recommendations to the Governor and the Legislature. Please know that the entire report is available on veterans.nebraska.gov under the Commissions and Boards tab, and you can find the Economic Impact Report there, along with applicable state statutes for the Commission and other information regarding Nebraska's Commission on Military and Veterans Affairs. In short, the report basically has 3 key components: a summary of the assets, their economic impact, and the Commission's recommendations. So the aim of this slide is to illustrate the statewide presence of military and veteran affairs facilities across the state. So this is actually a combination slide showing both the military facilities and the VA facilities. You can dig into the report to see more specific slides for VA facilities or military facilities across the state. So obviously, Offutt Air Force Base in Sarpy County is our main federal military installation. We have our National Guard Joint Force Headquarters here in Lincoln, and we have a nationally recognized Nebraska State Cemetery in Alliance, Nebraska. With that, I will turn it over to Mitch to discuss the economic impact of these facilities and assets.
Okay, so as Phil mentioned, the report was broken into several pieces. First, we summarized the assets in the state of Nebraska. Second, we computed an economic impact. And third, we looked at some of the recommendations that we can make based on the information we put together in the report. We'll be presenting the information a little bit differently than it is laid out in the report today. We'll start with the economic impact, just to give everybody, right off the bat, a sense of the effect that military DoD spending is having on the state here in Nebraska. So when we think about economic impact, we use IMPLAN, which is an industry standard model, to estimate the effect of spending on various industries, in this case, the military industry. So when we think about economic impact, we're looking at the direct, indirect, and induced effects. So direct effect can be thought of as the direct spending that takes place in an installation. For example, the spending that takes place at Offutt. Indirect spending can be thought of as the economic activity that occurs as businesses support operations at Offutt. And induced effects can be thought about as employees of those businesses go and spend their paychecks day to day, the economic activity that occurs as a result of that spending. We roll these things together and we talk about a total economic effect, total output. And you can see on this slide that we present three separate economic impact analyses. So first, looking at the military bases and installations. This includes active duty components such as Offutt and Stratcom. This includes National Guard and Air National Guard spending at locations in Lincoln and throughout the state. And it includes U.S. Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force reserves that are located in various locations throughout the state. So summing the figures up for those various installations, we see a $2.34 billion in total economic output, $1.31 billion in employee compensation, and about 25,303 jobs supported in Nebraska. Next, we move to look at the effect of retirement and pension spending on DoD retirees. What's the effect of that on the state? So, as many of you know, as folks retire out of the service, they receive pensions and supports from the DoD. We just looked, and I'll show this on a later slide, the number of folks that actually receive retirement payments in the state. But we looked at that total number annually, the total amount of support those folks receive. In looking at that spending, we see that 2,783 jobs in Nebraska are supported by that spending. And this results in $114.2 million in compensation to those employees. Next, we looked at VA spending. So there's big VA facilities in Omaha and Lincoln and clinics throughout the state. And a large number of dollars roll in. We'll show a map later that shows that spending by county. But again, looking at the economic impact of that spending, we see $1.74 billion in economic output. That supports the employment of 13,844 workers in the state with a total salary of $676.1 million. As Phil mentioned, this is the second year we've completed this analysis. So in 2017, the three estimates you saw on this slide, those are completed in 2017 and 2018. In 2018, we added a couple of additional things. These are not things we didn't consider in 2017, but we just did not conduct an economic impact analysis for them. But we wanted to see what's the effect of Corps of Engineers spending on the state and GI Bill spending on the state. Corps of Engineers has a major presence in Omaha with the headquarters located there, and they support operations throughout the state on dams and levees and things like that. So looking at Corps of Engineers spending in Nebraska, we see that's $162.4 million in economic output, 1,557 jobs, and $99.1 million in employee compensation. And with GI Bill spending, we see $43.1 million in economic output, employment of 449 people, and compensation of $21.3 million.
And if I may, Mitch, I'd like to really draw attention to the GI Bill spending in Nebraska. We're really fortunate in the state to have colleges and universities that support members of the military and veterans. In fact, in October of 2018, the Military Times ranked the best colleges for veterans. And in the four-year university category, both the University of Nebraska Omaha and the University of Nebraska Lincoln ranked in the top 25. In the two-year college and university category, we're very pleased to see Central Community College ranked number one nationally, and then of course in the state of Nebraska as well. And then we also saw Western Nebraska Community College ranked, and those did very well in the rankings as well. Finally, I believe Bellevue University ranked number 7th in the online and non-traditional college sector. So we're really very pleased with certainly the amount of GI Bill spending in the state. And then we're certainly pleased with the student veteran success centers that help veterans use that benefit. So this really comes into play because it's an important way to attract and retain veterans to the state. Using the GI Bill is a win for the veteran, it's a win for the college and university, and it's a win for the local and the state economy. So with that, we'll continue on.
All right, thanks, Phil.
Yep.
So what we see here, so now we're stepping back from the economic impact analyses that were conducted. And what we'll present in the next couple of slides is just some more descriptive information about the number of folks employed at various installations in the state and some VA spending numbers here in retirement numbers in a second. But on this slide, you see the number of personnel that are employed at each of the major locations or groupings of locations. So you can see Offutt Air Force Base and Stratcom. Over 9,600 people are employed annually, or in fiscal year 2018, or 2017, excuse me, on Offutt and Stratcom. And there's over $1.2 billion of spending that took place there in fiscal year 2017. Nebraska National Guard, this includes federal and state personnel, so this is National Guard, Air National Guard, and NEMA. Over 4,500 people are employed by these agencies with over $250 million in spending. As I mentioned earlier, reserve components have a presence throughout the state. Over 2,000 people are employed by reserve components throughout the state with over $34.8 million in spending. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers employs 850 people in the state with about $83.2 million in spending.
Yeah, if I may, Mitch, I'd just like to point out being able to account for that reserve component is unique for Nebraska. So when I reach out to my colleagues in other states and we sort of look at their economic impact report of military and veterans affairs, not all states are able to do that. So I'm very thankful for the Bureau's efforts to do the hard work necessary to try to account as best we can for the Army, the Air Force, Marine Corps, and the Navy Reserve personnel here in Nebraska.
Right, and it does kind of get into how we collected our data. So if you look at Offutt and the Stratcom numbers, those numbers are derived directly from a report that they put out each year. The Nebraska National Guard and Air National Guard, it's also taken from a report that's put out annually. But the information for the reserves, that was information that Phil helped a lot. He facilitated the discussions between the BBR and the appropriate people in those components. But that was information we had to go out and collect because it's not readily available, and maybe that's why other states aren't including it. And then the Corps of Engineers, Nebraska is somewhat unique that there's only Corps of Engineers headquarters in so many states. And we are also fortunate that they had just happened to put out a recent economic impact study themselves in recent years. So we're able to use that information as well as information that's publicly available to get at those numbers and derive an estimate for that agency as well. As we saw earlier, we wanted to look at the impact of DoD military retiree spending. So these are folks that retired from the service and are drawing pensions in retirement. So you can see this is broken out by branch: Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. So you can see the total number of retirees that retired out of each of those branches that are receiving payments in fiscal year 2017. There's a total of 13,712 in fiscal year 2017. Not surprisingly, given the large presence of Offutt and Stratcom, the large majority of these are Air Force retirees. You can see monthly payments that are made to these folks in millions of dollars, as well as the annual payments that are made in millions of dollars. So we see that $373.3 million are paid out to DoD retirees in the state in fiscal year 2017, and this number fluctuates a little bit. The number actually...
It's stayed pretty steady between the 2 years, so with minor fluctuations.
Right. So finally, we want to present the VA spending. Again, as I mentioned, there's big facilities in Omaha and Lincoln, as well as smaller clinics and facilities throughout the state. So here we can just see the VA spending $1.21 billion, broken out across 6 major categories that they provide in publicly available reports. Again, a considerable sum of money that's flowing into the state as a result of VA spending. And just to provide a little more context or detail about where that spending goes, this is just a map that breaks the spending out by county. Not surprisingly, Douglas, Sarpy, and Lancaster counties, the darker green shaded counties, are seeing the highest level of spending. Again, this is highly correlated with population, where the population lives, but also the presence of where major facilities are located. So that provides a little more context, and there's more information about that if you want to, if you feel like downloading the report and taking a look at it. You can see that we break this down by per capita, per vet, per county. We do a few more things, provide a little more detail in the report itself. So with that, I will turn it over to Phil, and he can talk about the kind of contextualize the economic impact of these.
Sure. Just to highlight a point, again, like Mitch said, I'd really encourage you to take a look at the full report, to recognize the hard work of the county veteran service officers and the hard work of the state service officers with the Nebraska Department of Veterans Affairs, who do the heavy lifting to connect veterans to their earned benefits. So moving back to the economic impact, I like to place that in context to kind of give you a sense of where this fits into the state's economy. So as Mitch mentioned earlier, the Bureau has used well-established modeling tools, public policy modeling tools. And we also tried to compare it to the insurance industry and the ethanol industry. And people always ask, well, why do you choose the ethanol industry or the insurance industry? And the reason why is that the Bureau of Business Research conducted these reports. And so if you're using the same tools and the same methodology with the same experts, you're more likely to have a stronger basket to compare the economic impacts to. And certainly one of the strengths of the Bureau of Business Research is its expertise in the Nebraska economy. And I would just draw your attention there to a recent ethanol study and a recent insurance industry study. And you can kind of see where Military and Veterans Affairs certainly supports a lot of jobs in the state. Not as many as the insurance industry, but a few more than the ethanol industry. So I hope that helps the audience place the economic impact in context. So as we discussed earlier, there are 3 key elements to the Commission report: the summary of the assets, the economic impact, which we have discussed, and finally the Commission recommendations. So a little bit of background on how we got to the recommendations that we have today. In 2017, the Commission assessed recommendations from the 2008 Base Realignment and Closure Task Force and validated 6 of the 8 2008 recommendations. In 2018, the Commission assessed the recommendations from the 2017 report and validated 6 of 6 recommendations. And again, please be sure to read the entire report to get a little more information and context on these recommendations. So these are the first 3, and we'll discuss the final 3 next. So some slight changes to the recommendations in 2018. We added that the Commission should recommend that Nebraska colleges and universities engage in partnerships with the Department of Defense when feasible. So the Commission highlighted the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's National Security Studies Program and the work of the National Strategic Research Institute at the University of Nebraska. Regarding Commission recommendation number 5, we added regulatory reform to the recommendation. In 2018, Nebraska made progress through the creation of military teaching permits and by instituting a rule that provides special consideration for attorneys who are military spouse attorneys. An example of recent legislation or current legislation from this session that was passed and signed into law this spring includes Legislative Bill 12, which was introduced by Senator Blood, which allows active duty military members or their spouses to be licensed realtors in Nebraska without having to pay a licensing fee, provided that they have a valid realtor's license in another state. Additionally, Legislative Bill 115 was signed into law by Governor Ricketts, which establishes the right for military families assigned to Nebraska to preliminarily enroll in a school district. So a lot of these ideas are coming from the Department of Defense. The service secretaries, the Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Army have been very clear on their priorities for high-quality schools and easing licensure burden. Additionally, the Defense State Liaison Office has provided a number of public policy recommendations, which a lot of our state senators have embraced and have incorporated in their legislation. Finally, I'd like to draw attention to recommendation number 6, where encouraging military retirees to live and work in Nebraska. It's been a consistent Commission recommendation, starting from the 2008 BRAC Task Force to being a recommendation in 2017 and 2018. Finally, within the Commission report, I'd like to draw attention to preliminary results and impact of recent military and veterans-related legislation. And we looked at this going back to about 2010. So with that's our report. That's our summary of assets, the economic impact, and our Commission recommendations. So we look forward to some audience questions.
All right, thank you, everyone. That concludes, as Phil mentioned, the presentation of the report itself. At this point, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have for us. And as Phil mentioned, we encourage everyone to visit the Commission on Military and Veterans Affairs website and download a full version of the report and take a look at it for yourself. There's lots of information. We hit the high points in this presentation, but there's a lot more detailed information in there if you'd like.
Yep. So while we're waiting for questions, I'd just like to highlight the UH-72 Lakota helicopter, which is part of Nebraska's Army National Guard inventory. And I'd like to recognize the over 400 members of Nebraska's National Guard they've been on state active duty supporting the flood relief efforts. And I believe you'll see the KC-135 aerial refueling tanker partnered up with an RC-135 rivet joint aircraft. I think over 100 members of Nebraska's Air National Guard are currently deployed overseas, primarily in the U.S. Central Command Area of Operations. And I suspect you'll see a lot more KC-135s and RC-135s over Lincoln once start the repair work to the runway at Offutt Air Force Base. So with that, do we have any questions?
Not quite yet.
So
we can jump ahead while we're waiting for questions. Here's one.
yeah.
The question is, do you think that with all the benefits that go along with being in the military sell themselves, or do you have to advertise a lot?
I think that really sort of gets to the heart of recruiting for military service. We didn't really look at recruiting numbers of recruits that come from Nebraska per se. So I would just be sort of speculating in my sort of personal knowledge. But there are a lot of benefits to military service. Certainly the soft skills. We did look at the soft skills in 2017, the leadership skills, the ability to work as part of a team. The ability to have exposure to different cultures and different groups of people come in useful. And certainly there's Veterans Affairs benefits that come with military service, whether it's the GI Bill or other veterans benefits over the veteran's life cycle. So I think my personal opinion is that the benefits sort of they sell themselves. They stand for what they are. I don't.
Phil's in a much better position to answer this than I am. I've never been a part of the military, so Phil definitely has expertise on this one. So.
Yeah, we're working on that. We'll still try to get him to sign up here soon enough. So, but thank you for your question. And if you have additional follow-on questions, please be sure to reach out to either one of us.
Yep.
So, what else? Are there any more questions? Well, I'll ask Mitch a question then. What did you learn in 2018 that was sort of different from the 2017 report, or what was most striking to you?
I think the information related to the GI Bill spending was very interesting, because that's something that doesn't get talked about often, at least not in our discussions or any of the other state level reports of this nature that I've seen. So I thought that was useful, just see the amount of money that flows in, and we had some information. We could break it down by students at each school in the state or each college and university in the state. So that was interesting. Some of the stuff we did in 2017 too, looking at, we estimated some numbers looking at what's the estimated increase in workforce in Nebraska if Offutt were here versus if it weren't here. So we looked at the Omaha Metro in relation to comparable metros with and without an Air Force base. And it was interesting to see some of the percentages that Omaha does have the Omaha area, the counties that make up the Omaha Metro, the Nebraska portion of the Omaha Metro, did have a higher percentage of military retirees than what would be expected.
Sure.
Just from looking at comparable cities in the region that do not have a base.
Sure.
So we got a couple more questions. Could you give the web address of the full report once again?
Absolutely. So if you go to veterans, veterans.nebraska.gov, you'll see a tab, the Commission and Boards tab, and then if you scroll down to the Commission on Military and Veterans Affairs, you'll find the 2018, the 2017 Economic Impact Report of Nebraska's military assets, along with the 2008 BRAC Task Force, along with the meetings of the Commission, the minutes of the Commission meetings, and the state statutes that apply to the Commission. So please be sure to take a look at that. And then we have another question. Do you have a historical information on GI Bill spending? Has there been an increase or decrease over the last 5 years? That's a great question, and it's something that we could potentially look at in our 2019 report. And additionally, the purpose of incorporating the GI Bill spending this year is that so then we'd be able to track it into the future and sort of create that history for the state. But we definitely would want to take that in consideration for the next iteration of the report.
And I guess I would just point out that my recollection, because that was not easy information to obtain, it wasn't readily available, so we had to do a little bit of digging and just trying to recall the data set or the data file that we had to download for that information. It did seem like there was some historical information, but maybe just 1 year back or 2 years back. So if the sender of that question would like to follow up with an email to me, my contact information is right there. Feel free to send it to Phil too. Yep. We could do our best to get back to you and answer that question. I'd have to go back and look at our files to see
Yeah, we'll
see what
take that
file
for
looks like.
action. We can dig a little bit on that.
Yep.
So, next question. Are the improvements at Offutt, such as the Runway Headquarter building, counted in the economic impact for Nebraska?
I can actually speak to this one just because we actually did see, if you look at the 2017 report to the 2018 report, so fiscal year 2016 to fiscal year 2017, we did see a decrease. If people don't mind if I flip back a few slides. So if you look at that top number, $2.34 billion in economic output, that number, I believe, is actually a little bit smaller than the number in the 2017 report. And there's no way to know this for sure, but the numbers at Offutt and US Stratcom, if you look at those annual reports, those are down just a little bit from 2017, or from fiscal year 2016. And it's because the construction wrapped up. The construction of the headquarters.
Right, the construction of the Stratcom headquarters had wound down. And certainly with recent events, it's likely that the construction numbers, the repair work numbers will go up in the near term.
Yeah, so that's a good question. The runway, no, I don't believe would be included, but we did account for the fact that the new headquarters building was near completion at least.
Right, and once the runway repair work starts, then it would be included in future iterations or future economic impact reports.
Right, that should show up in Offutt and Stratcom's new report that they put out for the new fiscal year.
Yep.
Okay, next question. Do you expect to see an increase in the numbers with the new STEM program and the vet tech coming soon? I think this Phil question. Is this related to the grant program in Bellevue? Is that?
Well, there are a number of sort of military and veterans related STEM programs. So the National Math Plus Science Initiative recently awarded a Department of Defense STEM grant to Bellevue Public Schools to assist their efforts to both increase the number of students participating in sort of AP coursework related to STEM fields, and then also raise their scores in those fields. There's also a Department of Defense education activity STEM grant to Bellevue Public Schools for elementary school students as well. So, well, I'm not exactly certain if that answers the question, but we'd be happy to discuss that further if you would sort of email some additional details to Mitch or I to make sure we're properly accounting for that. So, next question. Do you believe that the military is efficient with our spending, or are there any areas we could cut back on?
I'm not sure we are, based on this report at least, I'm not sure we are in a position to answer this question. We did not do anything that looked at operations or procurement or anything like that. So that question might be a little outside the scope, at least, of this report.
Sure, and you will see sort of the fiscal year 2020 National Defense Authorization Act. You'll see a sort of an increase in both the Department of Defense's budget. I think it's up to around $733 billion at this point. You also see about a 7.5% and 8% increase to the federal Department of Veterans Affairs budget as well. So, to what degree the military is efficient with that funding? We didn't assess that in our report. So.
Right, if there are any more questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, if you're, here's another one. Was tuition assistance for reserve and active duty individuals factored into the data? I believe the National Guard data included some of that. I'm not sure about reserve and active duty though. Reserve, I'm definitely not sure about. We would have to go back and look at the Offutt and Stratcom report.
So the federal assistance would have been included in the top line number for the federal VA spending in the state. As for sort of the state level, the Nebraska National Guard tuition assistance and the sort of that data, we did account for state spending in the report. However, we did not include that in the top line economic output numbers because our economic model, we viewed that as spending coming from Nebraska and going back to Nebraska versus being sort of outside spending coming in. So sort of the internal state spending that would occur, primarily via and through the state National Guard appropriation and the Nebraska Department of Veterans Affairs appropriation. We consider that sort of internal funds, if you will. So, but again, happy to follow up with additional detail.
Yeah, absolutely. As Phil mentioned, we kind of, we looked at that National Guard budget and kind of picked out the pieces that we felt like were not appropriate to include in this particular impact study, and that was one piece we did not. So.
Yep. Any more questions? Well, again, thank you, Mitch, and thanks to Dr. Eric Thompson as well. It's been a great collaboration. I really enjoyed working with you and the whole team, and the BBR scholars. Certainly appreciate their hard work on this as well.
Yeah, and we thank you, Phil, and all the members of your team as well. For everyone still on, if you'd like to connect with the Bureau of Business Research, there's various ways to do so. So there's the social media information that can get you connected to the Bureau. We have one more question. Does the spending in counties include construction projects? I would assume that's the VA spending, and yes, it does.
Yep. So if I can click through the slides. Right, so you'll see there on the construction tab, so the federal VA construction was included in the $1.2 billion assessment. So, and I believe, I think the federal VA spending went up from fiscal year 2016 to fiscal year 2017. So, yep, so about 17 million of the 1.2 billion was construction related federal spending. And that was spread across, if you're talking specifically against these county maps, that's right, that it would, how spread across. So
right, yeah.
All right.
Okay. I think unless there are any other questions, we don't see any right now. But again, we'd like to thank you again for joining us today. We appreciate everybody's time and your attention. It's been a pleasure to work on this with Phil and everyone at the commission, and we look forward to hopefully future work together. So again, thanks everyone for your time today, and please do not hesitate to contact Phil or myself or connect with the BBR as you'd like. Thank you very much.
Yeah.